Thank you, gentlemen. I think what is clear is some hard thinking is required to solve for African problems. And I think all of you gentlemen have provided the right insights in helping us think through this sector. We're going to take 2 minutes as we switch mics, and then we'll start the next session. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. The next session is also a focused one, focused on transportation and logistics. And to moderate this session is Victoria Enoc Ahiamadu. Victoria is an associate in the syndications unit of the African Finance Corporation, a leading multilateral finance institution in Africa, where she helps mobilize funding from third-party sources and successfully distributes the firm's assets through primary and secondary markets. Victoria has extensive experience in project finance opportunities across Africa, and she has helped mobilize billions of dollars for the growth and development of the African continent. If you can help me welcome Victoria to moderate the next session.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, so today we're here to discuss the topic of power to move, accelerating the transportation and logistics transition in Africa. And then to do justice to this topic, we've put together a great panel. So I'll just introduce them one by one to come up stage, and then they will do a fuller introduction when they come up stage. So we have Josh Whale. Can we put our hands together as he comes up? Lisa Thomas, Tracey Tanner, Mahmoud Hatem, and Simon, last but not the least. Yeah. All right, great. So without wasting any further time, I'll just allow the panelists to do like a quick 1 minute intro of themselves and their companies, and then we get right into it. So starting with Josh.
Thanks, Victoria. Hi, I'm Josh Whale, so I'm CEO of Ampersand. We are an electric mobility energy company based in Nairobi, Kenya, and Kigali in Rwanda. We run a fleet of batteries which power a fleet of motorcycles. These motorcycles cover around 1 million kilometers a week right now. We have 1,350 motorbikes on the road, yeah, plans to expand further. But yeah, pleasure to be here today.
Great, thank you. Okay, over to you, Lisa.
I'm Lisa Thomas. I am the co-founder and partner actually at ATG Samata. We've just rebranded. We merged with another fund. We are a gender lens blended venture fund focused on 6 key markets in sub-Saharan Africa. And we invest through our climate vertical into electric vehicles. But we do a lot more than that as well.
Thank you. Simon?
I'm Simon. I'm an engineer. My background is in automotive. Spent 15 years working for Jaguar, Land Rover, Ford and Tata, building all sorts of components and products. And I'm the CEO and founder of Ox Delivers. We help businesses scale by providing them with dependable transport. In short, we're a kind of Uber for potatoes using electric vehicles.
Uber for potatoes.
Thank you. Mahmoud?
Hello everyone. Hello ladies and gentlemen. Actually, the room is quite empty because it's end of day. I'm Mahmoud Hatem. I'm the Vice President for Middle East and Africa for Moharram and Partners. We're a consultancy firm specialized in public policy and business to government. We work in more than 25 countries. So we're covering North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, GCC, Pakistan and India. We have a very strong portfolio. We have very strong credentials in ICT. So we've got Google, Microsoft, Amazon, AWS, Meta as our clients. And in payment, we've got Visa and MasterCard. We've got Spotify, Kaspersky. I'm very happy to be here in London in an African event because I usually travel to Africa. So being here in an African event, that's something really great. A pleasure to meet you all.
Thank you very much. So Tracey?
I'm Tracey Turner. I'm the founder and the chair of Copia Global, which is an e-commerce business based in East Africa. We serve basically low-income people who live in villages in the middle of nowhere. So we're doing a huge amount of last-mile distribution. Our delivery trucks that deliver to 50,000 villages across Kenya every day, number about 500 or so, and they travel each about 60 kilometers a day, delivering 1 million orders a day to low-income families across the country. So it's quite a logistics challenge. And when I founded the company, everyone said, oh, you'll never be able to do that. And here we are 10 years later, and proud to be able to say we've built quite a logistics engine serving last mile in Africa.
Great, thank you so much, Tracey. So we just get right into it. Obviously, we know the impact of transport infrastructure on the African continent, and now we're really trying to hone in on resilient, sustainable transport infrastructure on the continent. And we'll start by hearing like the private sector's perspective on this. So Lisa, the statistics shows about 6% of infrastructure investments in Africa comes from private sector, which is kind of low compared to like the Middle East that has like 12%. So firstly, do you feel like there's a role that the private sector has to play in transport infrastructure? And if so, what are the areas of collaboration? Any thoughts on that from your perspective?
Sure, and we had this discussion earlier because I was surprised by that statistic because I live in Nairobi, where effectively the public transportation system is all private. We have Matatu buses that it's all owned privately, but the difference is in other countries is actually run by the government. So how we look at this is that there's a really great role that the government can play in partnership with the private sector. Okay. So for example, we invested in an electric vehicle company in Ghana, and they do bikes, cars, and buses. And so one of the things that they're looking to do is actually help the government public transportation system to actually transition away from combustion engines into electric buses, and to really move the entire country towards electric vehicles. And so I think we had the Africa Climate Week not too long ago in Kenya, and there were a lot of countries that put a number of stakes in the ground in how they want to start to take action on climate change. And this is one way that governments can really do that, is working with electric vehicle companies, so both ours or your company or others, that actually are bringing this type of, I'll call it technology, to the continent and really making sure that more of these vehicles get out on the road. I think we'll talk more about that, but that's the first thing that I would say.
Great. No, I absolutely agree that it's obviously step by step. And like you were talking behind the scenes, Kenya has really advanced, but the other African countries really need to catch up. And maybe we just move to Mahmoud from the government's perspective. Are there any policies you're seeing that are inspiring? What's the role of strong policies as a whole? And are there any examples on the continent that you could share with us for this move of developing sustainable transport infrastructure?
Okay, actually I was planning to improvise, but my team insisted that I need to read from this, so I'll have a look every okay? So the strong policies, they provide regulatory frameworks that guides the development to ensure that they align with sustainability goals. So basically we will talk about 5 main pillars: the financial incentives, the charging infrastructure development, the zero emission vehicle mandates, the tax incentives, and research and development funding. So when it comes to financial incentives, the government can offer like tax credits, subsidies, and grant to reduce the upfront cost for purchasing like electrical vehicle. And when it comes to charging the infrastructure development, policies can mandate the installation of widespread networks, charging stations, to make it easier for EV owners to recharge their vehicles. And then for the zero emission vehicle mandates, the government can set targets and regulation that require a certain percentage of vehicles sold, such as the EVs. And definitely these mandates gonna create market demand for electrical vehicles and drive their adoption. The fourth pillar is tax incentives. Like the government can provide tax credits or exemptions for the production and consumption of clean fuels and making them more economically viable and competitive with conventional fossil fuels. And the last pillar is the R&D funding. So that government, they should allocate funds for research and development initiatives on clean fuel technology. And definitely these kind of investments gonna accelerate technological advancement and commercialization of clean fuel options.
Right. On the policy side as well, are there any countries that have taken the lead in this, for example?
Yeah, so basically there are like two initiatives that the African countries are adopting. There is the African Union Agenda for 2063. That's it enhance market access and attract foreign direct investment in terms of accessibility, connectivity, and job creation. Okay. And I should mention the Ethiopian model that they made, like when it comes to infrastructure, they made a lane for cycling and for walking. Okay. And it will start like in few years. So they're putting that into consideration with the support of the United Nations Environmental Program, UNEP.
Right. Okay, no, that's helpful, because even like when I think of like countries like Morocco, I think they have this policy as well for this whole green transport infrastructure, which is setting the path and leading the way for just many other countries to take lead on that. Okay, so we've talked about from the private side, from the public side. Now let's maybe go into the meat of this transport transition. And then statistics shows that transport currently caters for about 10% of the greenhouse gas emissions in Africa. So Josh, I don't know if you could share with us, we've always had this term of the energy transition can't happen without the transport transition and vice versa. So from your perspective, leading a leading company that deals in EVs, what's the mutual dependency on these two And how do you see this like playing in the overarching scheme of like developing Africa?
I mean, certainly, like the original reason that I founded the company and for my team, a core part of our values is about climate change, as continued planetary habitability is something worth fighting for. But there is also a direct monetary correlation, particularly when we look longer term at the potential around carbon markets. It's certainly, we don't see carbon at the moment, especially as a core part of our business model. It's more of an accelerator if those markets actually materialize, if the moral hazard around potentially large corporates using carbon to continue their pollutants, if that aspect of it is also resolved. But in the markets where we operate, so Rwanda and Kenya both have very green grids. Rwanda just over the weekend closed down its peaking diesel generation, is now purchasing hydropower from Uganda. In Kenya, the grid is about 93% renewable. So that's very much very attractive for us, and I think also for the right kind of investors is also very important. And as a startup, we need to raise external capital. So it makes sense from a bottom line perspective as well as for our core values.
Right, so if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that there are concurrent goals that are being achieved at the same time. So the transport transition is happening alongside the energy transition. One doesn't need to happen before the other per se.
Very much so, and also for countries, like we are seeing now big movements in Rwanda, in Kenya, with plans to get rid of petrol motorcycles in favor of electric ones. Uganda the same as well. And I don't speak for those governments, obviously, but what we understand is that fuel imports are a huge drain on hard currency reserves for these countries at the same time as the cost of debt servicing has gone up because of interest rates. At the same time, there is already this electricity generation infrastructure, often on quite expensive PPAs, but where there is currently a surplus of that generation capacity, which we can absorb. So we absorb surplus electricity capacity by electrifying road transport and eliminating those fuel imports.
All right, well, that's interesting because this whole electrification of the transport system in Africa is like a hot topic, and obviously we've seen the adoption of that in places like Kenya and Rwanda a lot. Places like Nigeria is still coming up. We recently got some charging stations set up in Nigeria, which is like hopeful for us, and we're hoping that we see more of that in Nigeria. Do you want to add anything, Lisa? Okay, I thought you wanted to add something.
I was just nodding in agreement.
Okay. All right, so...
Victoria, if you allow me, can I add something, please?
Sure.
So basically, I didn't talk about the PPP, the public-private partnership.
Okay.
So the government, they often face like a budget constraint when it comes to executing any project. So with the help of private sector, it's usually feasible when there is this kind of cooperation.
Right.
So we cannot ignore the PPP in general, whether in any initiative or any big governmental project.
I agree.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that
Thank you.
addition. Sorry, just going back to the electric mobility discussion. So Josh, we've seen that 41 million of the used imported cars come into Africa, which is like a huge percentage, right? So what are the prospects for electric mobility adoption in Africa? Are you hopeful, and where do you see us going in the next few years, I guess?
You went, Simon?
Yeah,
Sorry, Simon, right,
Go for it.
sorry, my bad.
So Josh can answer probably just as well as me, but
Maybe you can chip in after.
yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing to recognise is that electric vehicles are perfect for Africa, right?
Okay.
We see a lot of noise around EVs, a lot of written in the press, and it's normally around Teslas and personal vehicles and everything else. But actually, when you look at what the core of electric vehicles are good at, they're really efficient, they use really cheap fuel, so they're really cheap to operate. It's perfect for a continent which is capital constrained. They require very little maintenance, so you don't need a big dealer network and complex repairs, so that's perfect.
Yeah.
And they represent, so put those two things together, they represent an ideal solution compared to ICE engines, which are all powered by, as Josh said, fuel that's spent hard dollars on, because there's no fuel refined on the continent. But I think what is really important about EVs is what you can't do is take a Western vehicle model, which to be honest was designed for an ICE environment anyway. The model is essentially the same as one operating 100 years ago. We have to find solutions that work in the African context with the African users, and that's what Josh is doing with motorcycles and swapping batteries. It's what we're doing with EVs and providing transport as a service. But it's a much more logical way to think about transport. Why should I spend a lot of money on a complicated, expensive asset that I have to maintain? I just want to move stuff. And when you move stuff, you create lots of value. And that's where I think the transition, the momentum for the transition will come from. I don't think it's a public sector push at all. You know, it's 100 years since the Ford Model T was launched. And at that time, there were no decent roads, no fuel stations, no service networks in America. And guess how many the government built? Almost none. It was only much later that became a kind of government incentive once the use of that is demonstrated. So for us, what we're about is providing reliable transport to businesses so they can grow. And that is a massive growth generation on the whole economy. And the fact we're using an electric vehicle means it's cheaper to run and cheaper to maintain, which is good for us. Happens also to be good for the planet, happens also to be good for the foreign exchange. Like, there are no downsides about transitioning to EVs. The trick is not trying to copy a Western model, not trying to do the same old thing that's done everywhere else. And that's also true of Tesla, right? Tesla are wiping the floor with everyone in the West at the moment. Why? Because they've innovated on the business model. They haven't copied Ford or VW or anybody else. They've done something different. And there's the opportunity to do the same in Africa with African solutions.
Yeah, Lisa, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I just want to add two things to that. I mean, there's still, I agree that there's certainly demand. We're seeing that with our company in Ghana. They've got a wait list. But also, it's more expensive than a combustion engine vehicle is still, right? Both the new ones and, you know, in some cases, indefinitely more expensive than the used. And so there's two pieces that need to get fixed here. One is financing. People need to be able to get financing for these vehicles. We have the demand, not everyone has the capital to be able to buy one. And so it's affordable financing. On the same, in the same vein, this goes a bit back to the government argument is, you know, there are certainly policies, more policies that the government can put in place to, because nothing is actually actually I shouldn't say nothing. I understand that there are some electric vehicles now being manufactured on the continent, but very few are manufactured on the continent. There are kits that are brought in from China, from India, etc., which is fine. But then reduce the tariffs of bringing those in order to make it more competitive with the combustion engines as well. Because the life of that, the vehicle, the cost to the consumer is actually less than if you're running a combustion engine. We all know that. But people got to get over that first hurdle of the bigger ticket price. If we can fix that, then it will drive adoption a lot faster as well.
But that's why we need to move away from selling vehicles. It's why Josh doesn't sell his batteries, he rents his batteries. You know, like, why would you have an asset of that value sitting around only being utilised by one business? Much more effective if multiple businesses can use it. And so people ask me, how expensive is the truck? Well, the answer is, well, it's about 10 cents to move 100 kilos a kilometre. So it's much, much cheaper than an ICE vehicle because I'm only paying for what I use. But we get the back-end benefit of the fact it cost us less to move that 100 kilos that kilometre.
Mm. And I think that's true for if you're thinking about trucks and boaters and things like this. I think because people want to have their own transportation, they want to have cars, and that is part of the adoption as well. Yeah.
But it is still by far in Africa, I mean, 50% of the road fleet are these commercial use motorcycles, and then on top of that, the trucks. So the beauty of clean mobility in Africa is you have this incredible utilization rate, which means that you can recoup that cost with the right business model innovation. Like in our case, you know, as Simon said, we separate the cost of the battery from the cost of the vehicle. Mm-hmm. That way we can sell an electric motorcycle that costs less than a petrol motorcycle, yet has more power than a petrol motorbike. And so with the right mix of business model innovation and asset financing, we can address that commercial market. Because, for example, in Kigali, a petrol motorcycle, or one of our motorbikes as well, will cover about 180 kilometers every day. A private user is only going to cover about 20. So I had one of our motorcycles for a few years, and I was our worst customer because I would go away, I would sit around, the battery would be completely underutilized. So I was always getting complained at by my colleagues.
No, that's very helpful. And then just talking about this point around like even the charging points piece, I was telling you just earlier on the panel that in Nigeria, I think I just recently saw like the first charging points piece, but I'm sure there are more. And I hear that people that have EVs in the country have to like ship it in with like the charging ports. So maybe Tracey, and Lisa, just talking about like the prospects there are for like the partnerships, public-private partnerships there as well. Should this be the government managing like just the way we have like filling stations or fuel stations around? Should there be like designated charging points and maybe
the governments provide fuel stations? Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, no, but
so why should governments provide electric stations?
So it should still be the private sector running everything, but maybe them. So what role does government have to play apart from like maybe the policy side, I guess, or incentives?
Do you want to tackle that first?
Sorry? Please, yeah.
Well, I am a bit biased, but I think if we wait for public solutions to these challenges, we're going to be waiting for too long. The private sector has to innovate. The private sector is the answer, but this is my personal. But I think that there's so much opportunity for innovation everywhere you turn. Okay. Look, I work in rural Africa, right? Where there are no roads. Most of our trucks are on muddy roads, and there's lots of software systems in the world designed for delivery systems. Like we haven't invented e-commerce. That's a round wheel that's been invented, but there's no software out there for deliveries in rural Africa, which have unpaved roads with rainy seasons, right? So we had to build our own software to work in those kinds of environments because there's nothing in the world to serve those kinds of markets. So I think that the fastest way to a greener world, to a more efficient world, to a more inclusive world that reaches the mass market in Africa is for the private sector to innovate. And if the public sector wants to support those initiatives, fantastic, right? But my world is mostly a Kenya lens as well, which is it's very private sector driven in the distribution industry. So I have that bias for sure. But I think that it's you see the most innovative ideas popping up across the continent in the private sector.
No, I agree with you as well. Even what we do at AFC, it's really like private sector led, and we've been able to like create a lot of impact on the continent. But while we're still on you, Tracey, you're in the e-commerce space, and that was badly hit during the COVID-19 pandemic. So can you just share with us how you see things panning out and some of the challenges? I mean, you've shared some of the challenges, so maybe any further challenges and any solutions that your company has been working on lately.
Since the pandemic?
Yeah, post-pandemic.
So it's interesting that the impact of COVID in Africa was not so much a health impact. Obviously there was health impact and it was tragic, but the significant impact was an economic recession. So if you look at, the 80-20 rule, unfortunately, in my world means more than 80% of people make less than $20 a day. For my customers, it's about $5 a day. In this economy, because of all the COVID-induced and Ukraine war-induced change, they make $3 a day, right? So if you make $5 a day, you're buying food, but you're also buying other stuff, right? You're buying soap, and you're buying plastic chair, and you're buying school books, and so forth. If you're making $3 a day, you're buying food. So it's had a massive impact on the purchasing power of the mass market in Africa, and that's then had an impact on all retailers across the board, but especially Copia, where we're specifically designed to serve the mass market and a lower income consumer. So I think that we have not yet seen the recovery from that economic recession, which I think was triggered in the COVID pandemic and persists today.
Right, thank you. And indeed, we're hopeful that as we continue to come out of the pandemic, we would see like full recovery, although like the global happenings keep sort of taking us some steps back, but hopefully we'll come out of it fully. But Tracey, still while on you, I'd like to just you to share with us some policies that you think can be implemented, and maybe also Mahmoud, if you want to chip in, to ensure that mobility solutions in Africa are inclusive and are accessible to vulnerable populace, so the rural areas. What policies, what initiatives would you suggest or think that we should, or government should implement, and maybe private sector as well?
Would you like to go ahead? Or?
Go ahead.
Okay, so concerning the inspiring policies for sustainable transport infrastructure in Africa, I would like to talk about the African Union initiative, the Africa 2063, which was adopted to emphasize the sustainable transport infrastructure as a key driver of economic development and social inclusion. And actually this agenda, it recognizes that efficient and reliable transportation systems that are essential for facilitating whether trade, investment, and the movement of goods and services within Africa, to enhance market access and stimulate the intra-African trade and attract foreign direct investment, whether by providing accessible transportation options such as public transit system and sustainable transport infrastructure throughout connectivity that can create better connectivity between the rural and the urban areas, fostering economic opportunities in marginalized regions and reducing inequalities, and definitely job creation as well through the development and maintenance of sustainable transport infrastructure. And there is also the African Continental Free Trade Area, which agrees to harmonize transportation policies and improve connectivity across the continent by fostering trade and economic growth, by aligning standards, procedures, and regulations related to customs, documentation, and transport operations, and also for better connectivity in general across the continent. So basically these two initiatives, whether the African Continental Free Trade or the initiative of 2063.
All right, Tracey, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, well, I guess I would just add, I'm sort of bringing us down a notch to the grassroots of transportation, but just pave some roads, right? If the public sector is going to do anything, pave the roads. It's amazing the economic activity that sprouts when you have a paved road. Absolutely. That's it, that's all it takes. And then you can have all your electric vehicles driving down the roads, right? But this just start with, and I started working in Kenya, 25 years ago when there were like 3 paved roads in the whole country. And so it's massively transformed over the last couple decades. Just you pave a road and then you just see the businesses sprout up along that road, the jobs that are created because of that transport, right? So you just create those networks, and it's just comes alive with economic activity. So I think I would just start there.
No, I absolutely agree. Paving roads, whether or not they feel like there's an economic activity happening there, because sometimes what we see is the opposite. They feel like, okay, there's some prospects in this area, so we then now pave this road. But as you said, once you pave the road,
it comes.
It comes.
If you build it, they will come.
Yeah, absolutely.
But Africa has such a big infrastructure gap. It would take probably beyond 2063.
So back to my first point, which is don't wait for the government.
Absolutely. Well, the first roads in America were built by Ford and Firestone and other names like that. But one of the things that we do specifically is build an electric truck for dirt roads, because we're not going to wait for the roads to show up. And Africa today, I've heard from a statistic, has less roads than it had 50 years ago. Like things are getting better in places like Rwanda has some beautiful roads, but it also has some really awful roads. And so we have to build technology to work in the current situation. Once you've got a road there, it's great. You take the knobbly tires off and put nice slicked ones, and it's not a problem. But if you, I guess Josh is saying, you're building a motorbike that will survive on the roads of Kigali, like it's not.
It's more costly, and it's certainly a bigger hurdle.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you look at Copia we run large trucks to deliver to all the villages we operate in. And I'm constantly hammering on the team, like, why are we spending money on these large trucks? We could run smaller trucks, it'd be more efficient, less costly, less fuel. You know, we could get electric trucks, like all these good things happen, but the roads can't, smaller trucks can't handle the quality of the roads.
Yeah.
Right, so please bring your electric trucks to our villages.
Next year, we'll have a chat afterwards.
Absolutely. Please, if anyone has any question in the audience, this might be a good time to start raising your hand while we still have a few more questions to go through. Okay. So Lisa, coming back to you, on ride-sharing apps, was basically the use of technology in trying to foster connecting people from like the rural areas to where the jobs are, where the cities are. Do you have any thoughts on some things like the ride-sharing apps, mobile mobility networks, etc.?
I think I would take it a step further in that I don't know that at using a rideshare, so potentially a car, to get people from the rural area into the jobs or into the urban areas is necessarily the solution, but could be expanded to be able to use that for getting on an electric bus, for getting on a boda, and being able to provide people with that opportunity. The thing about it is that a lot of people who need those jobs still don't have a phone that could take an app to do that. Right. So I think we need some, additional solutions there, right? So in Kenya we use M-Pesa for pretty much everything still, even though we can tap with credit cards now, which is faster. Yeah. But there are lots of features utilizing M-Pesa where you can buy your bus ticket and everything else. Right. So if you transitioned to electric buses and then were able to buy that through, buy your ticket on that and could actually get the bus scheduled, that's also a key, through, a text-based phone, I think that could really help a lot of people. And it's extremely important to be able to get people connected. And I think, we're seeing a lot of urbanization across the continent. I don't remember the statistic at the moment, but of the top 20 mega cities that are growing around the world, at least 5 of them are in Africa. And so I think it might actually be more. So we do need to solve a lot of transportation and mobility issues before it completely explodes within the cities as well, because people need to be able to get around. Yeah. So and they need to be able to have access to jobs as well, because that's the only way that people are going to be able to improve their livelihoods. But yeah, that would be, I would say being able to access tickets for buses and reliable buses and bodas, maybe not necessarily rideshare apps for cars at the moment. I think it's still too expensive as well for the average citizen in a lot of countries.
No, that's absolutely amazing, because especially what you said around like just the rural people being connected, because like we have all these mega cities buzzing, but we still have those very rural communities that don't have direct access or easy access to the cities. So thank you for sharing that. So any question? Okay, I see a few hands. So I think, I don't know if they are mics.
Hi, my name is Tracey, I'm from Senegal. Hi, my question is, to what extent do you guys work with developers to leverage the data that you have in terms of giving you insight as to, where things are moving, where they need to be stored, etc., so that, at the end of the day, you have more things that are closer to each other, so that you actually need less movement between those things, right? So that's the first question. Does that make sense?
Can you take it again?
What, software developers?
So you guys generate data, right, with your solutions, right? So you do know where things are moving from to and what is moving from to, right? So that can actually dictate actual more intelligent development in terms of the infrastructure beyond the transportation infrastructure, like for instance, warehousing or housing or office space that private developers are doing. So to what extent do you guys work in partnership with them to share some of that data? That's the first question. The second question is a bit out there. In terms of alternative ways of moving things, what are your thoughts on some of the things that people talk about, like drones or other alternatives?
Can I go first? So data is massively important, right? Why do you move stuff? You move stuff to trade. Trade, every time you move stuff, you have a buyer, you have a seller, you have a payment, you have a marketplace, etc., etc. So this is about building the right models, but models that enable people to trade effectively is key. We've talked to the Rwandan government about where should they put their roads, because we know where the people are actually moving stuff to and from. So it's a massive part of what we do. In terms of things like drones and stuff like that, if you would like to take your phone and hold it out like this for half an hour, how's your arm going to feel? Because my phone's on the table and it doesn't move and I haven't used any energy. So if you want to hold something up in the air, that's fine by me, but I wouldn't do it because it's a real waste of energy. We've only got a finite amount of it, whether it be electrical or anything else.
I'd add, so we use data an incredible amount as well, but it's much more internally. So we have this fleet of batteries that moves around. The batteries cost more than the motorcycles to build, and so ensuring an efficient utilization of those assets, making sure that we put the swap stations in the right places, we size them correctly, is super important for efficient use of capital. We also use the data to prolong the lifespan of the battery as well, so we can do preventative maintenance to keep it going. It's 80% of our long-term capital need is going to be is the battery pack itself. So making sure that it's used sensibly is critical. So we can see where all the batteries are, how much power is consumed in real time. That provides a lot of data that is of interest already for a variety of potential users, but we haven't started to monetize that yet.
Okay, I think I saw another hand. Okay. Yeah, please go for it.
Good afternoon. I'm from Nigeria, and I work for an agency that's responsible for infrastructure and public-private partnerships. When you talk about transportation and logistics for Africa, one of the things that you've talked about here on this panel is private sector basically being the one driving transportation. In many of the countries that we aspire to be like, transportation, like housing and water, is a social right, and it's provided by government. But a lot of the countries in Africa don't have that kind of capital that they can devote to transportation. We've made efforts in Nigeria with railways, even though so far it's passenger rail and not rolling stock, not freight, where you make a lot of the money, and we're losing money there. We've taken loans from the Chinese to build these, but we are unable to get investors to come into these sorts of investments because these are investments that require patient capital, and predominantly people expect that governments will provide that sort of investment in those sectors. And we see it all over Africa. Governments struggle to prioritize where to put funding. Nigeria is one of the countries in Africa with the highest transportation costs. One of our major business entrepreneurs says it's cheaper for him to bring goods from China than to ship it from Lagos to the north. Yeah. So what ideas do you have as private sector to advise government? Because no matter what you do on your level, it is government that will be able to fix the problem holistically for the large numbers of the population that we have in Africa. Private sector will not be able to do it. Thank you.
If you allow me to answer this question, basically that's why God created public policy agencies like Moharram and Partners. We basically do what you're saying exactly. We're in the middle between the private sector and the public sector. So the public sector is the one who's going to execute the project, but the private sector is the one who will bring the fund, and they will collaborate together to get the best for the citizens at the end of the day. So I totally agree with you about when it comes to like these are basic needs, whether the infrastructure, the water, the electricity, it should be done by the government. But here when we say the private sector, the private sector will help. It will be a second arm. You know what I mean? So,
can I completely
yeah,
disagree?
please.
So who built the electricity network in America? Was it the government? No, it wasn't. It was a bunch of entrepreneurs who realized that they had something valuable. Who built the roads? Entrepreneurs.
She's asking about Nigeria, not
I know.
America.
So I guess my question would be, show me a country where basic infrastructure that is a public good was first built by the government. And I suspect you'll struggle to find the country. Because after a while, sure, it becomes public, right? Because once you have it, everybody starts using it. I was talking to Victory Farms who do fish, right? And to do fish in Lake Kivu, they have to build a cold chain. And they're saying, right, we're building a cold chain because we see the value in moving fish around. But then they're going to spin it out because that cold chain becomes something that everybody can use. And then that pulls income in. So I think the thing that the public sector has to do is create incentives that encourage businesses and not chop them off at the knees. So I guess the obvious one in Nigeria is the fuel subsidy, which has been dealt with. But like, why would a government be subsidizing fuel when there's cheaper locally generated fuel there? But of course, there aren't many e-mobility startups in Nigeria because that subsidy existed for so long.
Yeah, number one reason.
So it's about creating an environment where entrepreneurs like us guys can come along and try things and figure out what the right solution is. I have to say mass transit is the hardest problem, which is why I'm nowhere near that problem, because it is very close to being a public good, and how do you make it work? But commercial transport, if you've got places where people are moving goods backwards and forwards, roads become an obvious investment. We invest in bridges because it makes our business better, right? And once it's there, then it gets maintained, and eventually the public purse crowds in.
Well, honestly speaking, you convinced me.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we had one more question, although we're running out of time, but we can take it quickly.
That was good, actually.
I guess I was just wondering if you have access to the right kind of capital to be able to grow your businesses, and also I'm trying to understand what are some of the challenges that you're facing when raising capital in the private sector.
Yeah, great question. So as a startup, particularly with a lot of technology development, so we developed and build our own battery packs. There was nothing available when we went into the market. We do all this software work I already mentioned as well. So we typically went to, and have gone until now, to technology VC or impact climate tech VC. However, we do have a lot of assets on our balance sheet, which is a constraint to long-term growth. So right now we are looking now at offloading some of that. We've had a couple of approaches already from providers that would like to either set up an SPV and become a super client, or a corporate strategic partner that just wants to buy 15,000 batteries from us. And in terms of the longer term capital need, we're looking at to capture the current sort of $13.2 billion fuel for motorcycles market that is within profitability for us and still with a 15% value proposition for the customer or better. We're looking at about $4 billion of capital need, sort of some combination of debt and equity, but yeah, really looking to offload now some of those battery assets off of our balance sheet.
Tracey, how have you found raising capital?
I love raising capital. It's my favorite thing to do. I wish I could do more fundraising. It's just not enough fundraising in my life. No, I think that look, there's not enough capital. It's like a drip, right? I mean, when I started Copia, there's $100 million of venture capital in the entire continent, which is not even one industry in Silicon Valley, right? And now it's about 5 billion or so. We'll see where this year lands, but it's still a drop, right? It's like not even 1% of the global venture capital. So I think the best thing all of us can do is go get one of your friends who's never been to Africa, drag them by the hair to visit, right? Because once people see it, they realize like, wow, this place is unbelievable. Like the opportunities are everywhere. The economic vibrancy, the entrepreneurial energy, the intelligence, it's just a lack of awareness, right? And we need to change that dynamic so that we generate more international capital flowing. And obviously we need to nurture the existing ecosystem in the continent, but it's just not going to be enough, right? So I think all of us are doing our best to raise capital. We've raised about $100 million at Copia, which is a large chunk of change. But it's, you know, Amazon raised $3 billion before they turned a profit, right? And we have to do it in Africa, which is a tough economic environment compared to North America, on $100 million. Like it's not even in the same stratosphere. So I think it's just about bringing awareness, bringing more companies to Africa, bringing more investors, more angels, more PE. Everybody just needs more awareness of all the good things that are happening.
Yeah. And more imagination to think outside some of the constrained boxes that we've seen, you know, in other sectors. We've got lots of very mature businesses in the West, and it's really easy to innovate in a tiny pocket of the value chain between two other businesses. It's not how business works in Africa. You have to cover the value chain. You have to build technology for dirt roads, and so that requires a different approach. And Africa's like in the blitz scaling, you know, as a continent, it's blitz scaling, right? The growth coming is just so enormous, it's insane. So we need to find capital that really sees that opportunity, because so many people are going to be Africans in 100 years' time, right? Africa goes from being the same size as the rest of the world to as big as Asia, and everybody else is losing people by comparison.
I'll add, just from the investor's perspective very quickly, in addition to businesses are built differently on the continent, capital has to look different on the continent as well. We can't just transplant the Silicon Valley model into Africa. That is exactly what Tracey was saying as well. And so we need to look at other types of capital to fund these businesses, and we're hoping to encourage others to take the blended venture model that we have.
Great. What a great way to end the panel, because I already see Anke's here. So thank you so much, panelists,
Thank you very much.
for your time, and thank you everyone for coming.